So what we're going to talk about today is how to do some basic editing to our graffiti tags using Illustrator. And so to do this, what you're going to want to do is you are going to download the letter that is currently in Blackboard, and you're going to open it in Illustrator. Now, what I'm going to talk about, this applies to just this singular letter that we're going to work on, but it also applies to your entire graffiti tag. So the steps that I go through here are also going to be applicable to the entire project. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open Illustrator. And then once you're in Illustrator, we're going to create a new file. And I'm going to, for this portion, just drop it to one artboard. I'm going to keep it portrait orientation just because I'm using the letter R, which is fairly vertical. And just double check and make sure that you have the right color space. I'm going to leave this in CMYK only because I plan on printing it out. And then I'm also going to leave this at high. Make sure that this is at a higher resolution, or else it's going to kind of get a little bit fuzzy and it's not going to export as effectively. So once your presets look like this, go ahead and just make sure you give it a name. I'm going to call it Mazdier's Demo, and then we're going to hit create. And so once you have a little artboard that looks like this, we're going to do a couple things. I think it's really helpful to have my Illustrator layout look consistent with everyone else's. So just go to the top of the screen, and where it says window, click that drop down, and then under toolbars, I actually want you to hit advanced just because it gives you a few more options. And then under window, also just go over and make sure that under workspace, it's set to essentials. All of these other things will work, but it will make it a little bit harder to find some of the buttons. So essentials is what we're going to primarily use in this class. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to bring that image over into this file. So if you go to Finder, and then you're going to find that image that you downloaded. I just stuck it on the desktop because that was easy for me. And then you're just going to click and drag it and place it in Illustrator. And you should have something that looks kind of like this. The next thing we're going to have to do is just adjust it modestly. So you want to make sure that you're using your selection tool. That's this cursor right here. And you'll notice when I hover over these, it also gives me information, like it says right here, there's this little letter V. That's telling me that this is the keyboard shortcut. And I want you to make note of that and try and get in the habit of using those shortcuts, because once you become comfortable with them, it's going to be a lot faster. So I'm going to hit the letter V, and now I'm going to use it to bring my image over. And this is actually sized pretty consistently. But if I want to adjust the size and make it a little bit bigger to fit on the artboard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over a corner. And when I click and drag, I'm also pressing down on the Shift key. And this is going to keep it at the same aspect ratio. If I let go of Shift, you'll notice that I can really stretch it. And then I have to kind of eyeball what the original aspect ratio is. So again, hold down the Shift key, and that will give you a consistent aspect ratio. So I've sized this as a little bit bigger. And now what I want to do is I'm going to go over to my properties panel. And if I go near the bottom, there should be an option that says image trace. If you are not seeing this, the reason is probably because your image isn't selected. So you'll notice if I deselect the image by clicking on the background, all of a sudden I have none of that information. So make sure this is selected. You'll know it's selected because it's highlighted in blue. And we're going to click on image trace, and we're going to go to black and white logo. So I'm going to click that, and this dialog box will show up. It always says it will take a long time, and generally it doesn't. So you can hit do not show again, and then we'll hit OK. And next, what we're going to do is we are going to hit the expand option, which is essentially going to release all of these so we see them as individual paths. And that's what that little blue outline throughout this image is. But right now, everything is still locked together as one object. So what I want to do is I want to go to where it says ungroup. And I'm going to click on that and then deselect the image just by clicking on that gray pasteboard area. And now if I click on this white background and drag it, you'll see that that little border that was existing around it can be moved. And I'm going to delete that by just hitting the delete button. All right, so now I have this letter R. I'm not going to worry. You'll notice that these other pieces can be moved around. We are going to leave them for now. We want to keep those intact. So make sure you're not moving other portions of this. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually use something called Live Paint. And we're going to select the entire image. I'm just going to click and drag to highlight the whole image. The other thing you can do if you want to select everything is if you push down Command A, that will highlight the entire image as well. And once this entire image is selected, we're going to go to the top of the screen where it says Object. And then near the bottom, there should be a Live Paint option. And if you hover over that, we are going to click the Make icon, which doesn't look like it did anything particularly exciting, but you'll notice now I've got these little converted points, which tells me that this is about to work. The next thing we're going to have to do is figure out how we want to fill this in. And so we're going to want to have a couple things at the ready. I want everyone to go to where it says Window, and under Window, there should be an option that just says Swatches. And we're going to pull up our swatch panel just because I think it's a little bit easier to always have it out and accessible. And then we're going to go to our paint bucket tool. That's this little icon right here. And the keyboard shortcut is the letter K. So if I hit the letter K, now you'll notice I have this little paint bucket. And when I hover over this, it flashes. And that's telling me I'm ready to start adding color. So I'm going to go over to my swatch panel and I'm going to pick a color. These are really generic colors. So let's say I want this to be blue, but I don't love this blue. If I double click on it, this will open up my color picker tool. And from here, I can kind of play around and really kind of tailor it to get the color that I want. So I'm going to pick maybe an aqua blue. I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice it pops up right here. And if I like this color and I want to save it, all I have to do is click on it and drag it and pull it down here. And now it's going to exist in my little swatch panel. So if I go back over here and I hover, I can start filling in my little letter. And if I want to, I can even change that border. So if I don't want it to be black, maybe I want like a really dark purple, a little bit subtle, I can do that as well. And once I've gone through and I've identified the colors that I want to work with, we're going to do a couple more things to play around with this. We want to give this maybe a little bit more dimension and a little bit more highlight. So we're actually going to leave our paint bucket tool. We can come back to it later and go back to our selection tool. That's this little icon right here, keyboard shortcuts, letter V. And now what I want to do is I'm actually going to pull up the line segment tool. It's this thing that looks like a little slash. And I'm going to zoom in. You can do this on your keyboard by hitting the Command plus option. And I'm going to kind of find one of these kind of shadowed areas down here. And I am going to make a line. So I'm going to click and drag to make a line. And now I want my line to have a color because this is obviously not particularly impressive. So if you go over here to where it says stroke, this is what's going to change the border or the contour or the outline of an object. So if I click on this, I can go in and I can find a color that I'd like to work with. And maybe I want it to be that bright orange, or maybe I want that dark purple that I was working with. And now what I can do is I'm going to click right here and I'm just going to up the stroke width a little bit to make it a little bit heftier. And I'm actually just changing that stroke color just to match the border a little bit better. There we go. All right. So now that I've got this kind of heftier line, I can kind of play with the angle of it. And to do that, right now, you'll see that I've got this one bar going across the middle of it. And I'm going to want to turn this into a shape rather than a line. So if I go up to where it says object, under that drop down, we're going to go to path. And if you click on outline stroke, you'll notice that it's now turned it into an actual rectangle instead of a line or a path. And what's nice about this is now I can start manipulating the corners and changing the angle of it. And to do that, we're going to use what's called our direct selection tool. That is that little white cursor icon at the top. The keyboard shortcut's going to be the letter A. And so if I click on that, you'll notice now I've got these individual anchor points. That's what these little corners are telling me. They're anchor points. And I also have these little circles. And what these will do is they'll allow me to kind of convert this to a curve if I want to. But I don't want it to be a curve. I'm going to play with making this a little bit more angular. And so if you click on one of these corners, you'll notice, if you have really good vision, that there's a really tiny white dot in the middle. And that's telling me that now if I click on an anchor point, I can kind of drag it and manipulate these to make it a little bit more dynamic. And so if I want to kind of repeat this, I can go back to my regular mouse tool, that's the letter V, and I'm going to copy and paste this. And the shortcut for that is going to be Command C and Command V. And so I'm just going to start pasting a few of them. And then I'm going to have to edit these because obviously this overlap is not going to fly. So I'm going to go back to my direct selection tool and start tailoring these to better fit my letter. And so this is a nice way to give a little bit extra dimension to your letter. You could also use this to create highlights in addition to creating some depth. Another thing that we're going to want to do is give this a little bit of a high key value and make it a little bit more luminous, because right now everything is fairly mid-tone with the exception of these really dark values. And there are a few ways to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to actually use our pencil tool. The keyboard shortcut is going to be the letter N. And so if I push the letter N, you'll see this icon pops up right here. And just like we did before, we're going to want to have a path that is visible. And so I'm actually going to turn off my fill. That's going to be this little dash right here. And then under stroke, we're going to want a brighter color. I would say that yellow might be a little bit intense, so maybe I'll double click it and see if I can find maybe just a slightly less intense version of it. There we go. And I'm going to save it down here. So now what I'm going to do, now that I've got this bright value picked out, is I'm going to pick where I want to put a highlight. And if I click and drag, it'll give me this little line. And now what I can do, if I want to move it, I can use my little direct selection tool to kind of tease it a little bit and get it where I want if I'm not happy with the curve that I made. And so now that I have this, I'm gonna up the stroke again by clicking on this button, uh, just to give it a bit more weight. Now, visually, this looks kind of clunky, so we're gonna have to fix that. And there are a few things that we can do to help with this. If I click on the word stroke, this drop down is going to appear. And it's going to give me even more options with how to play with this. Now, if I want rounded corners, if I click on where it says cap, that's going to round off my corner so it looks a little bit more fluid. The other thing I can do with is where it says profile, if I click this drop down, it's going to give me a few different path options. So if I want something that's a little bit looser or a little bit more organic, I can play with that to see if there's something that better fits what it is I'm trying to do. Again, you don't have to use these, but it's worth playing around with them to see if they're going to help you out. And now what I want to do is I'm actually going to go up to where it says effect. And we're going to want to soften this. So under effect, there should be an option that says blur. And we're going to pick that first option. And you'll notice that as soon as I click it, I've got this sort of softer glow. And I would encourage you to turn on the preview just so you can see what it does. Because clearly if I just up this a little bit, this becomes really soft. So I'm going to drop it back down to something that I'm a little bit more happy with. And now I might say, okay, I like this, but maybe I don't love it. It still feels a little heavy. So what you can also do is you can go over to the opacity slider. And if I drop down the opacity on this, it'll also soften that to become a little bit more subtle. And so there are a lot of ways you can kind of play around with this to change the path until you find something that looks satisfactory to you. And that is a kind of general introduction to how to start playing with color, starting to add some depth, some highlights to your lettering.